but I do have a hot take. The Buster Sword origin story from Crisis Core is trash. Anybody that says the Buster Sword's origin story coming from Crisis Core is peak, is good, it falls in line with whatever the story is or whatever the heck they're trying to get with it, you're lying. You're fucking lying. It's trash. And I'll say why. I'll explain myself why. I don't want to say that it's trash just because of the clickbait or anything like that. I don't, and this is not, also disclaimer. This is not based off of the recent remake games or anything like that. This is from when Crisis Core originally came out on the PSP. That I've had this inkling fight within myself that it just didn't make sense. It completely ruined what the Buster Sword symbolized and like its weight with the Crisis Core origin story. And I'll say this. Yesterday I was on Twitter and I got into this like discussion with you know, to take a page out of Sebi Webb's book, anime PFP profile pic, which now makes total sense on why they blocked me. Because you can't have an argument. You can't have a debate with these people. They just block you. You can't have a civil adult debate with some of the modern Final Fantasy fans. It frustrates the living hell out of me. So their post says when Cloud himself is the one viewing the Buster Sword as a symbol of Zack, maybe it's time to rethink your arguments. Yes, Cloud used the sword, but it also symbolizes something deeper. To Cloud, it is the legacy of his fallen friend. Like it or hate it, that is the story. And in some ways, I do partly agree with that. Why? Because in the original Final Fantasy VII story, the Buster Sword is Cloud's default weapon, right? And kind of deduce that the weapon is maybe Shinra made, right? Because Cloud is ex-soldier. He still wears the uniform. You use materia, which is partly provided by Shinra themselves. So you can kind of deduce that the sword might have been provided to Cloud at some point in his life through Shinra, through working with or for Shinra, right? As you go through the story, you learn that the sword was actually transferred over to Cloud from his friend Zack. Now, Zack in the original FF story doesn't have much of a backstory in itself, right? You only see him, I think, in the flashback of Nibelheim. That's really all the information you get about Zack, right? You know that he handed the sword over to Cloud, and this is the reason why Cloud carries it, right? But my argument is that Square Enix did not plan for the sword to be this popular at all. Square Enix did not plan for the Buster Sword back in 1997 or 1998 when this game came out. Square Enix did not know that they would need to create a backstory for the Buster Sword. And how do I know that? Or why do I think that? Because the goddamn sword is optional to use for the entirety of the game. You get the first sword or the first weapon for Cloud, what is it, 30 minutes, an hour into the game, where you can unequip the Buster Sword and never equip it again for the rest of the game. I mean, that's pretty significant there in itself. If the sword is so important for the story, why can you change it, right? Why do all of these other weapons that Cloud have a dedicated animation, sprite, whatever the case? Maybe not in the cutscenes. I did find out that in the original, I wasn't 100% sure because I haven't played the original in so long at this point. But in the original, all the majority of the cutscenes did have or showcase Cloud with the Buster Sword, regardless of the weapon that you had, which is fine. Technical, I would say that this is where the technical limitations of that era definitely apply to the conversation. So I replied to this. If it is that important, why are you able to change it and not have it equipped and not have to have it equipped at all again? The sword held more value in Crisis Core, where you cannot change your weapon after getting it. Cloud can get a new weapon an hour into the game and never has to equip it again. And this is facts. If you go and even and this also applies into the remake series, and it's even more apparent that the Buster Sword is not as special as they wanted to make it seem, at least for Cloud, because as soon as you're able to get a new weapon, you're able to change into it. And not only that, but then development also went into integrating the other weapons models into cutscenes, which was a hardware limitation in 7. And it is the reason why the Buster Sword was present in those cases. But then in Remake, you're going to tell me that, the Buster Sword should hold the same weight? It's not even important enough to be made the main weapon of the cutscenes of the story? It's a little bit confusing to me, right? So they say she responded back, or he responded back, because gameplay mechanics don't overshadow what the story is telling you. The sword carries importance to Cloud because of who gave it to him. Okay, I can definitely understand the symbolism behind it. I'm not saying that I'm oblivious to what the sword means and why it should be important to Cloud. But that's not what we're getting, though. That's not what we're getting at all. The sword is so important that you can change it, not have it be used at all for the entirety of the game, and it's only used in specific moments to push the narrative agenda without having Zack be part of the main story of Final Fantasy VII. I'm not talking about the prequel. Without Crisis Core in the story, the sword still holds meaning, but it loses all its significance afterwards. She replied again, literally all the characters, or I said, I'm sorry, what does gameplay mechanics have to do in this conversation? If the sword is so important to the story, it shouldn't be optional to use. They even went through the trouble of integrating each weapon model into cutscenes. I'm talking more specifically here about the remake series. To which she responded, literally all the characters have a variety of weapons they use. That is gameplay mechanics. I'm talking about story here. Just because you, the player, choose to play with a different sword, doesn't mean the Buster Sword isn't important. Okay, fair enough. Let's take that concept and then flip it on its head. All the characters have a variety of weapons they use. The only gameplay mechanic that the different or the variety of weapons have within Final Fantasy VII OG is the simple fact that some weapons have more materia slots. Okay, Final Fantasy VII Remake already introduced the fact that you can upgrade the Buster Sword even further to allow more materia slots. So, gameplay wise, gameplay mechanic wise, that is already solved right there by upgrading the Buster Sword, which Cloud was hesitant at first, but then was convinced, I think, by Biggs or Wedge, and he got it done. So whatever sentimental value it held with Angeal, which we'll get to him in a moment, whatever sentimental value that held or that symbolism of loyalty and honor, and Geo not using the sword because it would cause wear and tear and rust, that just goes out the window the second that Cloud allows it to be modified. Regardless of the reason, whether it's his primary weapon, whether it's not, whatever the case. What is then the purpose of upgrading the Buster Sword if you're still going not to use it? You're still not gonna use it. There's still other weapons within the OG 7 and remake series that are better than the Buster Sword even after it gets upgraded, right? So gameplay mechanics have nothing to do with this conversation. Now let's also dive into the Buster Sword specifically, or why is the Buster Sword the only weapon that matters when it comes to it being or having different variations of it, right? None of the other weapons for any of the characters in Final Fantasy VII have anything to do with the story outside of the type of weapon it is that they use. Tifa having different type of gloves doesn't change anything about her story. Barrett having different gun attachments for his gun arm changes nothing in the story. Same thing with Yuffie. Same thing with Vincent. Same thing with Sid Highwind. Same thing with Kate Sith. With his weapon makes no fucking sense whatsoever. The only gameplay element of the different variety of weapons here is just the fact that you can add more materia into those weapons. Other than that, the weapons themselves serve no story purpose. None at all. The only exception is the Buster Sword. Now, let's jump in real quick because after this comment, they blocked me. I was preparing my response and I wasn't able to post it, right? Because then I was blocked. I was blocked because the conversation was not going their way. And let's see, over here. So I took a screenshot of it because god damn it, you're not going to just leave me hanging here with this argument. Why is this necessary? Let's have a discussion. Let's put on our big boy pants or big girl pants and let's just talk. Why can't we have a civilized discussion, argument, debate about our favorite games? Why does it have to be if I don't like what you're saying about this game, I'm just going to block you? That just seems childish. So I said, it's sad that you cannot have a civil adult debate with modern Final Fantasy fans without them blocking you or throwing a fit when they cannot articulate their argument. Hey, that's all that I'm looking for. It's just an articulated defense of why you think that something is good or something is not bad, why you agree with something or why do you disagree with something. So my response to them was going to be shorter, but after the fact, I just went in. So I said, Crisis Core used similar mechanics to FF7 with the use of materia and didn't give Zack the option to change his weapon outside of story specific moments. The first half of the game, you use the soldier sword. In the beach scene later on, you use an umbrella. And then once you have the Buster Sword, that is your main weapon for the rest of the game. With this in mind, without the knowledge of Crisis Core, when the original Final Fantasy VII came out, the Buster Sword did not hold the same weight it does today after the fact. You can clearly see that they did not know how to give the Buster Sword a proper origin story, and the one that became canon is trash. And you can't convince me otherwise because it feels shoehorned. Giving the sword to an unknown character at that point with a vague story on how he came to into its possession felt forced. OGFF7 did not know how popular the Buster Sword would become, and then canonically in the story, it went from Angio, an anonymous character who used it as a last resort or as a secondary weapon, symbol of honor, transferred over to Zack, who now uses it as a primary weapon under the guise of honor and legacy. The switch up here, which felt the most natural, and why Crisis Core's story holds up so well in the context of its own story, is because Angeal did not use the sword, and when he did use it, he mainly used it as a shield or just for defensive purposes. He never used it to strike. When Zack became the owner of the Buster Sword, he used the blunt side of the sword. And his reasoning was always the same as in Geo because use of the sword does wear and tear damage, it rusts it, whatever the case. Perfect. But you can also see that it's in line with Zack's character. Zack is not malicious at all. He's naive to his core, but he's not malicious. So he's not looking to hack people up left and right, despite of everything that's going on. So he's using the Buster Sword in a way that still holds the legacy and the honor aspect of Angeal's reasoning. Then after it transfers over to Zack, Cloud inherits the Buster Sword. All sense of honor and legacy goes out the window. Cloud uses the sword edge side down, which means that he is actually hacking people to pieces. His connection to Zack in the OG specifically, because in this one you can see that they're trying to incorporate that he remembers Zack far earlier into the story than what it was intended to in the original. But in the original, Cloud's connection to Zack is very in the background. Like you don't really know about Zack until very late in the game, and even after learning about him, it's so vague the information that you get that Cloud's use of the sword, while it's valid, like it makes a little bit more sense now at that point, you still have no context of what it symbolizes for him, emotionally. And this is a problem because the Buster Sword, it's clear that it didn't have an origin story. It's clear that the origin story was thought after the fact, after the game had released, after the game had received all its glowing reviews. It became what it became. That's when I feel that Square Enix thought and came to the conclusion of we have to make an origin story for this sword. It can't just be Cloud's main sword, which I don't understand why it couldn't have just been that. Because my argument is that the Buster Sword's origin story could have well have been written off as it's just a unique weapon from Shinra that is given to soldiers depending on their level or whatnot. That can definitely explain why Zack had it and gave it to Cloud, or let's say that it maybe explains why Cloud, without the knowledge of Zack, has a Buster Sword because it's company property. Police have guns and tasers. Soldiers have big ass swords. And this premise, it's also explored a little bit in Crisis Core. Zack starts Crisis Core having a soldier class sword, while Angel also has a soldier class sword and has the Buster Sword as an ornament in his bag. The Buster Sword for the first half of Crisis Core is a back bling. It's a Fortnite back bling. That's all it is. So let's get this straight. For the longest time, Angel always stated that the using the sword would cause rust, wear and tear, right? So then why the heck did he use it to kill his mom? Where's the honor in that? For all of that, you could have used then the soldier class weapon that you had, because in the beginning of the game, he has a soldier class weapon. And one of the best cinematics of Crisis Core, the part where Angel, Genesis, and Sephiroth are in the training room and they get into this scuffle or whatnot. Angel is using a soldier class weapon. Only uses the Buster Sword to deflect, I think, one of Sephiroth's attacks. So you were able to do all this under the guise of legacy and honor. But then when it came down to actually showing honor, you used the weapon to kill your mom, his mom. I don't know the wording if this is gonna get this is gonna get pinged or whatnot. The sword is supposed to symbolize legacy, honor, but we're starting to see here where the cracks are starting to form, where that doesn't really matter. That doesn't really hold any weight to Square Enix. I looked up online to see like, okay, where did the sword come from? I know that there's some explanation in Crisis Core. Like I couldn't find the video specifically where they said it. So this is just like an AI answer, but it's good enough for now. And Geo Hewley received the Buster Sword from his father as a gift to celebrate him joining Soldier. It was forged as a symbol of pride and honor, with his parents going into debt to afford it, which resulted in his father dying of exhaustion while paying it back, leading Angio to rarely use it to avoid wear. Now, the reason why I say that this is vague is because they don't say who made the sword. Where did he have a commission to get it built? Did he have a commission at Shinra to build it? Which, if that's the case, then this sword is a Shinra technology or Shinra weaponry. If this was going to be the case, if it was going to be commissioned to have it be given to somebody, why did it have to be an unknown character? We already knew Zack from the original Final Fantasy VII. So there was no need to introduce a whole new character to make the sword his, to then have it be Zack. If it was commissioned by somebody to have it made for somebody, then it would have made more sense that it was commissioned by, let's say, Angio as Zack's best friend, Zack's mentor within the Crisis Core story, to be gifted to Zack for finally being able to join Soldier. Zack doesn't join Soldier or doesn't become a Soldier first class until Angio passes away. You know, it could have been it could have been so much better. I just don't like the NGO answer because it's too many steps to get to what ultimately is an optional weapon. It holds so much value that you don't even have to use it. That doesn't make any type of sense. Narratively, gameplay wise, it doesn't hold up. And to answer the gameplay aspect of this, you can't tell me that gameplay wise it makes sense because the way that Crisis Core went about it could have been the way that we went about it for Cloud in Final Fantasy VII. The character model of Cloud, it's so detailed and has so many resources spent on making him look so good that it just baffles me that they didn't put that much effort into the weapon itself. Instead of having Cloud have different variations of weapons, we could have seen different evolutions of the Buster Sword. Hell, maybe as part of the storyline, which then would tie into Advent Children, which seems to be the route that the remakes are going, is that we could have eventually evolved the Buster Sword into becoming the Fusion Sword. I think that that would have been narratively, that would have made the most sense because Cloud gets to keep the sword that his friend gave him as a symbol of holding down the legacy of honor and this and this and that, and the sword evolving with the character as the character continues to progress. But that's too much to ask because Cloud as a character is the character with the least progression in the entire Final Fantasy story. Barrett has more character progression than Cloud. God damn it, Red 13 has more character progression than Cloud. So that's my rant on this.